let me
Why
just
are
take
you
it from
saying?
another
Why are you
angle.
talking about a spiritual sun and the sun in quantum physics and the sun in this universe or this solar system, and that having something to do with a super individual and the individual and a soul? I don't understand.
All right. Here is, I'll put it in the context of Plato's cave allegory, which is located, in Book 7 of Plato's Republic. According to the cave allegory, and Plato had the same problem as you have. How to say these complicated philosophical ideas in a way that is comprehensible. So he created his cave allegory, wherein he said that we are like prisoners, shackled, head and foot, in a cave, forced to face the one end of the cave. Behind us is a large fire, which he later equates with the material sun, to get back to your question. In front of the fire, that is in the back of the cave, guards walk back and forth with silhouettes, cut out pieces of wood or stone or different objects, of natural objects from the real world. The people were born in the cave, they've never been outside of the cave. All they see are the shadows cast on the wall in front of them from the objects that are walked back behind them. And Plato said, now what if one of these prisoners in this cave was to be released from his chains, turned around and said, look, this is reality. You thought the shadows were real? That's not real. Look behind you. That's what the source of those shadows are. You think that's crazy? Watch this. Hauls them up to the world outside. He goes, those silhouettes of which the shadows were reflections are patterned on these things. Real trees, real people. And look up above, when your eyes adjust after a while, there's the sun, the source of everything.
So what's the evidence that what we see in this world is a reflection of something else?
This is a good question, and that is quantum physics is the evidence that this world is a reflection of
What
something else.
What in quantum physics?
Specifically, I want to focus on the photon, as I do in my thesis, because of the priority of the spiritual sun as a metaphor, and it's being reflected by the material sun. If that is true, and the soul is emanated from the spiritual sun, as Plato says, then it should be reflected. The metaphysics of the soul should be reflected in the quantum physics of the photon, and they are. A photon is a point, a particle. When you observe it, it behaves like a wave of probability, and that is going to raise questions when you're not observing it. This was the famous two-slit experiment. Similarly, the soul is an individual, personal entity of consciousness. When it observes itself as such, inconceivably simultaneously, it is a wave of potential being known as Brahman. The particle personal aspect of the soul is Atman. The impersonal wave nature is Brahman. That Atman-Brahman paradox is reflected in the quantum physics of photons and every other subatomic element.
What Atman-Brahman paradox?
The fact that the soul is simultaneously Atman, an atom of consciousness, and Brahman, a wave of impersonal potential being. How can something be simultaneously personal and impersonal, a wave and a particle, yet that is reflected in quantum physics? And that is something that Al Gore points out, not realizing that it actually validates Plato's philosophy. And it's one of the reasons Al Gore should retract his one-sided accusation against Plato for causing a spiritual crisis, when Plato's theory of the soul so strongly resembles Gore's own. What's the question? Well, furthermore, the one last point is the physicists who discovered quantum physics, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, David Bohm, Wolfgang Pauli, they all pointed to Plato and said, yeah, he knew. He knew what the deal was. The world we see around us is like a shadow, and it is emanating from the mathematical forms of this waves of probability, and that's where they lose me. I don't understand the mathematics behind quantum physics. I understand particles and waves, and I understand they said Plato knew what he was talking about. That's as far as I can go, because I'm not a mathematician.
But how do I know that you're not just trying to give credibility to some harebrained idea by associating it with something advanced like quantum physics, which is a very real thing?
Right. Because
where's the reality in the other side, in what you're talking about the soul and the particle and the wave? What does that have to do with the soul? What's the evidence for that?
All right, I'll come to that. The first, in answer to the first part of the question, I'm not attaching something respectable like quantum physics to some harebrained idea, because it was those individuals who wrote written testimony on Plato's behalf and the Vedanta Atman Brahman behalf, specifically Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger, but also Heisenberg. They all were aware of Plato. They all were aware of the Vedic philosophy. Schrödinger, in particular, was interested in that. Erwin Schrödinger and Werner Heisenberg co-discovered the information that led Niels Bohr to later coalesce their discoveries into the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, which is that the particle wave paradox in a nutshell. There's other parts of it, the holistic nature you asked earlier. Is there evidence for something that has knowledge, a holistic entity that knows all points of being simultaneously? Is there any evidence in nature that's possible? And there is, and that's another aspect of quantum physics. In addition to the particle wave paradox, there is a phenomenon known as action at a distance. I don't know all the details about it, but I know this. Any two electrons that were ever in orbit around the same atom, if they split off from that atom, even if they're at separate ends of the universe, if you spin one, whatever spinning an electron means, the other will simultaneously spin the opposite direction, which implies either infinite speed of communication or somehow they are in contact all along despite their spatial difference. It is a bizarre phenomenon, and it does back up some of the statements made by holistic philosophers like Plato and the Brahmins of India. Did you have a question? You're reaching.
But how are you connecting that with this idea of the soul? I don't understand. You're taking a material scientific knowledge and somehow correlating that to something that has, as far as I can see, no basis in reality.
All right. Well, now
what's your evidence? Where are you getting your evidence on the other side? And how are you connecting it?
There was one assumption there that I don't entirely agree with, and that is that quantum physics is a material science. Because what are waves of probability? That's not matter. And that's the point. That's the connecting point. And it was a good way you phrased the question. What's the connecting point? These waves of probability and the fact that they are psychoreactive, it appears. When we observe them, they dramatically alter their behavior, as if they know we're watching them. Like I say, I'm not a quantum physicist. I read the books by experts for the non-expert. The Cosmic Code I've read, In Search of Schrödinger's Cat, and Webb investigations. But these waves of probability are not necessarily matter, or if they are, it's a subtle form of matter. And so to answer your question, how do I connect the spiritual philosophy to this material philosophy? Because that material philosophy got to the foundation, the ground of matter, at which point it behaves a lot more like a mind. Particles and waves, that's like an idea in a mind. When you think of an idea, it's there in your mind. If you think of the number 3, there's the number 3. Now think of the number 5. The number 3 disappeared, 5 was there. Where did 3 go? It merged in some intangible realm as potential knowledge, which flashed back into my mind as soon as I wanted to think of it. And that's how the quantum particles behave, which led these quantum physicists to say, it looks more like the universe is more like a mind. It behaves more like a mind made of ideas than a machine made of cogs, which was the Newtonian philosophy, which Al Gore very specifically talks about, the mechanistic cosmology, which is the root of the spiritual crisis. And he says that Plato's theory of the disembodied soul led to that mechanistic cosmology, because once we disassociate the soul from matter, we look at matter like it's a machine and can be manipulated like a machine. And he's got a good point. And that did happen historically. Plato's philosophy did transmute into this mechanistic philosophy, but that wasn't Plato's fault. That is what I argue, that his philosophy was dissected and parts taken out, and one of the major parts that was taken out was the theory of reincarnation, which automatically puts us in a frame of mind to respect the earth. And I'll talk about that on another session. My friend Mr. X is rolling his finger like this because the time is up. Thank you for listening, and I hope you tune in next time. Hare Krishna.